the arrival that changed everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of Kansas when farmer Tom Bradley noticed something strange in the sky. What he first thought was a cluster of morning clouds soon revealed itself to be something far more extraordinary. Crystalline structures, each the size of a city block, descended slowly through the atmosphere like falling stars made of glass and light. Within hours, similar reports flooded in from every corner of the globe. Tokyo, London, Moscow, Cairo, Sydney, New York. Massive translucent ships were landing in fields, deserts, and empty spaces near major population centers. The ships were unlike anything humanity had ever imagined, their surfaces shifting between transparency and opacity, reflecting the sky in ways that made them appear both solid and ethereal. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the Emergency Command Center at the United Nations headquarters, her heart racing as she watched the live feeds from around the world. As the world's leading xenolinguist, she had spent her career preparing for this moment, first contact with an alien civilization. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the reality unfolding before her eyes. 37 ships confirmed. Worldwide, reported General Marcus Reynolds, his weathered face tense with controlled concern. No hostile actions detected, but they're not responding to any communication attempts either. Sarah adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the monitors. Each ship was identical, a perfect crystalline structure roughly 300 meters long, with no visible engines, weapons, or even doors. They simply sat there, humming softly with an energy that made nearby electronics flicker and spark. "Have we tried all frequency ranges?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Everything," Reynolds replied. "Radio, microwave, even light patterns. They're not responding to anything we throw at them." Dr. James Morrison, a quantum physicist from MIT, looked up from his tablet where he was analyzing energy readings from the ships. "The energy signatures are unlike anything we've ever seen. It's not nuclear, not fusion, not any form of propulsion we understand. It's almost like they're powered by something we haven't discovered yet." Hours passed with no movement from the ships. Military forces surrounded each landing site but maintained a respectful distance. World leaders held emergency sessions, trying to decide how to proceed. The stock markets crashed and recovered 3 times in a single day as humanity grappled with the reality that they were no longer alone in the universe. Then, as the sun began to set across the globe, something changed. The ships began to glow softly from within, their crystalline surfaces pulsing with gentle light. Slowly, seamlessly, openings appeared in their sides. Not doors that opened, but apertures that simply materialized as if the solid surface had become liquid. From each ship, figures began to emerge. They were tall, easily 7 feet in height, with elongated limbs and translucent skin that seemed to be made of the same crystalline material as their ships. Their faces were serene and angular, with large eyes that reflected light like prisms. They moved with fluid grace as if walking through water rather than air. "They're coming out," whispered a technician, his voice barely audible in the hushed command center. Sarah watched in fascination as the beings emerged in perfect synchronization worldwide. They didn't speak, didn't gesture, didn't acknowledge the human military forces surrounding them. Instead, they simply stood near their ships and began to observe. Their prismatic eyes swept across the landscape, the soldiers, the equipment, taking in every detail with what appeared to be scientific interest. "Why aren't they doing anything?" Reynolds muttered, his hand hovering near his communication device. "Maybe they're waiting for us to make the first move," Sarah suggested. "In many cultures, it's considered rude to speak first when entering someone else's territory." She was wrong. The aliens weren't waiting for humans to speak first. They were waiting for something else entirely. Days passed in tense standoff. The crystalline beings, whom the media had dubbed the Watchers, continued their silent observation. They would walk around their ships, studying the surrounding environment, occasionally focusing their attention on human activities. When soldiers approached, they didn't retreat or show aggression. They simply watched, as if the humans were fascinating specimens in a zoo. The strangest part was their behavior around human creativity. Whenever someone played music, painted, wrote, or engaged in any form of artistic expression near the ships, the watchers would gather and observe with what appeared to be intense interest. A street musician in Paris found himself surrounded by 6 of the beings, their prismatic eyes fixed on his guitar as he played. A child drawing with chalk in Tokyo attracted similar attention. Sarah began to notice patterns in their behavior. "They're not just observing randomly," she told Reynolds during their daily briefing. "They're drawn to specific human activities. Art, music, storytelling, even children playing imaginative games. They seem particularly interested in our creative expressions." "What do you think it means?" Reynolds asked. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "they're trying to understand something about us that they can't comprehend, something uniquely human." The breakthrough came on the 7th day. Sarah had been studying video footage of the watchers' behavior when she noticed something extraordinary. Their movements weren't random. They were following patterns, mathematical sequences that corresponded to human creative activities. When children played games, the watchers moved in formations that matched the game's rules. When musicians performed, their positioning reflected the mathematical principles underlying musical harmony. "They're not just watching," Sarah realized with growing excitement. "They're analyzing, categorizing, trying to understand the underlying principles of human creativity." That night, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She approached the ship that had landed in Central Park, carrying only a violin and a notebook. The watchers gathered around her as she began to play a simple melody, not a complex composition, but something that expressed pure human emotion. As she played, she noticed something remarkable. The watchers began to glow more brightly, their crystalline forms resonating with the music. Their eyes, which had been purely observational, now seemed to hold something that could only be described as wonder. When she finished, one of the watchers stepped forward. For the first time since their arrival, one of them spoke, not with words but by manipulating the air itself to create sound waves that formed recognizable patterns. "Why do you create sounds that serve no survival purpose?" The question came, not as words but as pure meaning transmitted directly into Sarah's mind. Sarah smiled, tears streaming down her face as she realized what was happening. "Because," she said aloud, "it makes us feel alive. It connects us to something greater than ourselves." The watcher stood motionless for a long moment, and Sarah could almost sense the profound contemplation taking place behind those prismatic eyes. Around the world, similar scenes were beginning to unfold as other humans began to understand what the watchers truly sought. They hadn't come to conquer or destroy. They had come to study the most remarkable discovery in their long history of exploring the galaxy. A species that created beauty not for survival, but for the simple joy of creating. A species that told stories not to convey information, but to share dreams and emotions. A species that made music not to communicate, but to touch the soul. Humanity had passed the first test without even knowing they were being tested. The real revelation, however, was yet to come. The truth behind the silence. The next morning brought changes that no one had anticipated. The watchers, previously silent and mysterious, began to interact with humans in ways that defied all expectations. They still didn't speak in traditional terms, but they had developed a method of communication that bypassed language entirely. Direct transmission of concepts, emotions, and images. Dr. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of this communication breakthrough. As she sat in her makeshift laboratory near the Central Park ship, she felt the familiar sensation of contact with the watcher consciousness. The being she had first communicated with the previous night approached her with what she had learned to recognize as curiosity. "We have a designation for you," came the thought voice, accompanied by a complex pattern of emotions that Sarah interpreted as respect and interest. "You are the bridge builder, the one who creates connections between understanding." Sarah felt a wave of warmth at the recognition. "What should I call you?" she asked, both aloud and in her thoughts. "I am the seeker of impossible things," came the reply, along with an image of stars and countless worlds. I have studied 743 different species across the galaxy. You are the first to create beauty without purpose. Over. The following days, Sarah learned the remarkable truth about the Watchers. They were not invaders or conquerors, but researchers, members of an ancient galactic civilization that had spent millennia cataloging and studying life throughout the universe. They had discovered thousands of intelligent species, each following predictable patterns of evolution and behavior. Every species we encounter follows logical progression, the Seeker explained during one of their communication sessions. They develop tools for survival, create societies for protection, build technologies for expansion, all purpose-driven, all logical. But humans, the concept that followed was tinged with something Sarah could only describe as awe. Humans create things that serve no survival function. You make music that doesn't improve hunting success. You paint images that don't enhance protection. You tell stories that don't convey survival information. Sarah laughed, a sound that made the Seeker's crystalline form shimmer with what she was beginning to understand as their version of delight. That's what makes us human, she said. We don't just survive, we live. We create beauty because it feeds our souls, tell stories because they connect us to each other, and make music because it expresses what words cannot. The revelation that followed changed everything. The Watchers revealed that they had been searching for centuries for a species like humanity, one that had developed what they called non-survival creativity. In their vast galactic database, containing detailed information about thousands of civilizations, humans were unique. We have found species that build beautiful cities, the Seeker explained, but they build them for status and defense. We have found species that create complex sounds, but they use them for mating calls and territorial claims. We have found species that tell stories, but only to preserve hunting knowledge and warn of dangers. You are the first to create purely for the joy of creation. General Reynolds, who had been monitoring the communications, looked skeptical. So you're saying that out of all the species in the galaxy, humans are the only ones who create art for art's sake? Not just art, Sarah translated as she received more complex concepts from the Seeker. They're talking about imagination, about the ability to envision things that don't exist yet, and then bring them into existence just because we want them to exist. They're talking about dreams, about the human capacity to look at reality and say what if, without any practical purpose in mind. Dr. Morrison, who had been studying the alien technology, suddenly looked up from his instruments. That explains the energy readings, he said excitedly. Their ships aren't just powered by some unknown energy source, they're powered by crystallized imagination. They've learned to harness the power of creative thought itself. The Seeker's form brightened at Morrison's words. Your species has great potential, came the thought message. You possess the rarest gift in the galaxy, the ability to imagine things that have never existed and make them real. This is why we came. Sarah felt her heart race with excitement and apprehension. You came to study us, but why the secrecy? Why not just communicate from the beginning? The answer that came was tinged with something that felt like embarrassment. We had to be certain. In our experience, species that possess survival-based intelligence often become aggressive when studied. We needed to understand if your creativity was genuine or merely a sophisticated form of territorial display. So you were testing us, Reynolds said, his voice carrying a note of understanding. You wanted to see if we would attack first or try to communicate. More than that, Sarah translated as she received a flood of complex concepts. They were testing whether our creativity was real or just another form of survival strategy. They needed to see if we would continue to create beauty even when faced with the unknown, even when afraid. The test had been passed in ways the Watchers hadn't expected. Around the world, humans had responded to the alien presence not with panic or aggression, but with curiosity and creativity. Street musicians had played concerts for the Watchers, children had drawn pictures of the crystalline beings, writers had crafted stories about the visitors, and artists had created sculptures, inspired by their ships. You continued to create even in the face of the unknown, the Seeker observed. This confirmed what we had hoped, that your creativity is not a survival strategy, but a fundamental aspect of your nature. The revelation that followed was even more extraordinary. The Watchers represented a galactic council of ancient species, and they had been searching for a species like humanity to join them not as subjects or allies, but as teachers. We have mastered survival, the Seeker explained. We have achieved immortality, conquered space, eliminated scarcity. But in our success, we have lost something precious, the ability to create without purpose, to dream without reason, to imagine impossible things and make them real. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she understood the full implications. You want to learn from us. You want us to teach you how to create for the joy of creating. We offer an exchange, the Seeker said, its form now glowing with warm light. We will share our knowledge of the galaxy, our technologies, our understanding of the universe. In return, you will teach us to dream, to create beauty for no reason other than the joy it brings. The days that followed were filled with wonder and learning. The Watchers shared technologies that could solve humanity's energy problems, medical, knowledge that could eliminate disease, and insights into the nature of reality itself. In return, humans shared their music, their art, their stories, and most importantly, their dreams. Children were brought to the ships to play games with the Watchers, teaching them the joy of imagination. Musicians performed concerts that made the crystalline beings glow with delight. Artists created collaborative works with the visitors, learning to express concepts in ways that transcended species boundaries. The exchange was not without its challenges. Many humans feared that sharing their creativity would somehow diminish it, while others worried that advanced alien technology would make human achievements meaningless. But Sarah and the other communication specialists worked tirelessly to help both species understand that creativity was not a finite resource. It grew stronger when shared. The first wave hit the new horizon like a tsunami of living metal and organic fury. The Soul Devourers expected to overwhelm the ship's defenses, absorb its technology, and add human knowledge to their collective consciousness. Instead, they encountered something they had never seen before, a species that fought dirty. The humans didn't try to match the Soul Devourers' advanced technology. Instead, they used mining charges to create debris fields that fouled the creatures' sensors. They used fusion torches to create heat sources that confused the parasites' thermal tracking. They used atmospheric processors to create chemical clouds that interfered with the creatures' biological systems. They're not adapting, Dr. Zhang reported with excitement. They don't know how to handle chaos. They're trying to find patterns that don't exist. The Soul Devourers had learned to fight military fleets with organized tactics and predictable strategies. They had never encountered a species that fought like cornered animals, using every dirty trick and underhanded tactic they could think of. The humans didn't follow the rules of warfare because they had never learned them. They fought to survive, and survival meant using everything available. Volkov led boarding parties onto the Soul Devourer ships, but they weren't trying to capture them. They were trying to plant explosives in the creatures' vital systems. The parasites couldn't understand why these strange beings were willing to sacrifice themselves for tactical advantage. They had never encountered a species that viewed death as an acceptable cost of victory. The turning point came when Dr. Okafor made a discovery that changed everything. The Soul Devourers weren't just parasites, they were lonely. They had been created as the ultimate weapon, but they had outlived their creators and spent millennia searching for a purpose. They consumed other species not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to understand what they were meant to be. They're not evil, Okafor reported to Chen. They're lost. They're trying to find their place in the universe by becoming everything they encounter. They're the ultimate predator, but they don't know what they're hunting for. Chen made a decision that would have been impossible for any other species. Instead of destroying the Soul Devourers, he offered them something they had never had: partnership. The humans didn't try to domesticate the creatures or control them. They offered them a choice. You've been alone for 8,000 years, Chen broadcast to the Soul Devourers. You've consumed worlds trying to find your purpose. We're offering you something different. Work with us. Help us protect the galaxy instead of consuming it. Find your purpose in creation instead of destruction. The Soul Devourers stopped their attack, confused by this unprecedented offer. They had never encountered a species that offered cooperation instead of resistance. They had absorbed the knowledge of dozens of civilizations, but none had ever suggested partnership. The transformation began slowly. The Soul Devourers started using their adaptive abilities to repair damaged ships instead of destroying them. They began creating instead of consuming, building instead of absorbing. They found their purpose not in being the ultimate predator, but in being the ultimate protector. The Galactic Harmony Council received word of the victory with a mixture of relief and bewilderment. The humans had not only defeated the Soul Devourers, they had turned them into allies. The most dangerous predator in galactic history had become the most powerful guardian. Elena Vasquez, still serving as the human observer, smiled as she read the reports. The council members who had feared humans as monsters were beginning to understand the truth. Humans weren't monsters. They were the species that tamed monsters, turned enemies into allies, and found hope in the darkest places. The New Horizon had found its new home, not on a distant planet, but in the space between worlds, working with their former enemies to protect the galaxy from threats that had not yet awakened. They had become exactly what they had always been, guardians who emerged from the darkness when the light was about to fail. The Soul Devourers had found their purpose, and the galaxy had gained protectors who understood that the greatest strength came not from conquest but from the courage to offer mercy to those who had never known it. In the end, the Death World Alliance was born not from fear, but from the uniquely human belief that everyone deserved a second chance, even ancient nightmares that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia.